Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to another episode of Dinner Guide. My name is Chef Andy and today we are going to be bringing a beautiful classic pastry dish. Today we are going to be making a key lime pie. Without further ado, I'll start by introducing the ingredients to my right. So from the farthest end, I've got some lemon juice, I've got some regular sugar, I've got some all-purpose flour, some unsalted butter, another pot here with some more sugar. I've got one piece of lemon there, I've got some vanilla essence, a regular egg there, some lemon zest and a bit of coconut milk, coconut cream. And with these ingredients, I'm actually going to show you how to come up with a very, very simple fridge set pastry dish. So this is not as regular as the ones that you're used to. You're going to be able to see it as we continue. I am going to give you now the chance to grab your pens and papers. If you need to freshen up, do take this opportunity because when we come back from the break, we're just going to go straight into the dish. So see you after a short while. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're just about to start making the beautiful pastry dish that I mentioned on the introduction. For those who missed out, we are going to be working on a key lime pie. And the first particular step is making the crust. So we're just going to jump straight into that. But before we continue, I'm going to be working with some of you might be able to know where to get these and some of you might not. So this is particularly just normally used as a takeaway container, and it's just an aluminum takeaway container. Now this particular one I'm going to be using for the reasons that I am going to be keeping this in the fridge. We are going to be setting it, and this is a particularly very, very good container for that purpose. The beautiful thing about this is it's a little lighter, it's a little easier to work with as well, and it actually is disposable. So if you do have a container that you can do the key lime pie in, maybe a non-stick container or a glass bowl, you can still use them, but I'm using this particular one because it's lighter and it actually allows me to be able to save a little more space. So without further ado, we are just going to go straight into the crust first of all. And for that, I'm going to need a bit of butter, a bit of flour, and a bit of sugar. So very, very simple. I'm just going to add the butter into a bowl. So for the quantities, for those who are taking notes, I'm using 160 grams butter, 160 grams flour, and 150 grams sugar. And I'm just going to pour about 3/4 of the flour. And remember, I'm only pouring it in small quantities just to make sure I don't have too much in there and I actually have a difficult time getting it out if it's in excess. And I'm also going to go with 3/4 way sugar as well. So as I always mention on the show, it is crucial when you're working with pastry not to throw all your ingredients in at once, especially for small techniques like this where you'll be rubbing in. Remember, the flour might just be a little different. The flour might change occasionally depending on the properties of your flour might change depending on the supplier or the particular product you're using. So just to be on the safe side, the quantities might be the same, but the product might not be exactly as you remember it. So I always take the precaution nonetheless. So now what I'm doing now is I'm basically just rubbing in the butter and the flour. And the rubbing in process basically entails you just using your fingertips and not your whole hand. So all you're doing is rubbing the butter and the flour against the tips of your fingers. And what we are looking for is a consistency that should resemble breadcrumbs. So I'm just going to go into it and I'll show you what it'll look like in a little while. So very important to remember that when you are making your crust, or if you're going to be rubbing in, very important that your butter is actually cold. This is for the reasons that if you try to work the same process, if you try to do the rub-in method and your butter isn't cold enough, you might actually have a difficult time getting those crumbs. So I'll insist when you're about to make your crust, do take your butter slightly, maybe about even half a minute just before you start, so that it's still cold when you cut it and rub it in. And as soon as you're done, also remember to make sure not to leave it next to a hot surface, because the butter will start to melt and it will give you a totally different result after that. I'm just going to add just a bit of flour, and I'm just going to continue rubbing in. So for quantities such as that, this should normally take you between 4 to 6 minutes. So do spare about 10 minutes just for this particular step. Also, something else to remember, have your oven preset as well. So my oven is now sitting at 180 degrees. And basically that's for the purpose of drying out our crust in a little while, which I'm going to show you. So I'm just going to continue rubbing that in. So this is just about done. I definitely can be able now to show you what the consistency we're looking for, ladies and gentlemen. So as you can see, it actually pours off your hands just like breadcrumbs would. So that is basically the consistency you're looking at when you're doing the rub-in method. And basically the beauty of this, or rather the reason for why the texture is like this, basically is because all your butter is incorporated with the flour. And basically that is why I was mentioning earlier, it actually resembles breadcrumbs when it's done. So all the butter is actually incorporated into your mixture. And actually just by the pour of the hand, you can see it just pours off really, really well. So those are very, very strong points to check for. And now we're just going to finish off the crust. And for that, I will need a bit of ice. So basically, I would be using ice water or very, very cold water. So normally I would just put a bit of water in a bowl with some ice cubes, give it a few seconds and it'll chill out, and I'll just go ahead and mix that. Now while we give the water a bit of time to cool, we're now just going to quickly whip our mixture, which we're going to allow to rest shortly. So for that, we are going to be incorporating some lemon juice, some lemon zest, some sugar, some vanilla, a bit of egg there, and a bit of lemon juice. So I'll start off with the lemon juice. Now going also with the vanilla. We're going to add that beautiful lemon zest. And then we are going to also split our egg. So we're only going to be working with the egg yolk for this particular recipe and not the whole egg. So very, very simple technique of splitting your egg. Just take off the top shell and then just tilt it and allow the excess egg white to just pour out. And all you need to do, please don't discard this before you're done. All you need to do is allow the yolk to slide onto the other half of the shell and twist it again. And then repeat the same process until you have extremely gotten rid of all your egg yolk. So you should actually, your egg white. So you should actually be able to just see a plain egg yolk before you actually mix it in there. And then for those who actually might be able to, or will be looking at trying the recipe out, remember, please don't discard the egg white that you just split. You can actually be able to save that and use it on another dish. You can use it to coat or to make your fish fingers or your chicken nuggets, anything of that nature. So please don't discard the egg white, it's still usable, okay? So now to that, I'm just going to add about 3/4 cup of coconut cream. And last but not least, about 1/2 cup of sugar. All we are going to do is whip that together. Right, and it's as simple as that. So you can actually let this sit aside, and while that sits, we are going to just finish off the crust as I mentioned. So I'm just going to add just a little bit of cold water, and we're going to mix that into a dough. So my water is now just perfectly icy, and all I'm going to do now is reconstitute the dough. And that should just, actually about a tablespoon and a half of cold water should be able to get your whole mixture well intact. So it should actually just be able to form a ball of dough immediately. So it's a very, very simple technique, as I said, very hassle-free, very direct. If you do follow the steps that I have shown you, it should actually be that simple. I'm just going to try and press onto the little crumbs in the bowl just to get them off. We're going to move that onto our board. And I'm just going to grab a rolling pin. And I'm also going to grab a bit of wax paper. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to be rolling this out and I'm going to be using it as a crust. I'm going to roll it out and put it in the container that I showed you earlier. And that's going to aid us in making the crust. So very simply, you'll need about 2 sheets of wax paper. Right, simple as that. And all you do is just press your ball of dough into one nice beautiful ball. And you just put that in the center of your sheet. And all you would do now is you'd use the other sheet that you had. So you'd probably just cover that on top. And all you're going to do now is let your rolling pin do the rest of the work for you. So I'm just going to press it first to just try and get an even thickness. Remember, you can't really roll it while it's still a ball, so you do have to kind of press it down against your board or against your working surface, whichever one you prefer. I'll just give it a turn and press it again. I'm just going to show you what it looks like. So all I'm doing is just trying to get an even thickness so that I can actually be able to roll it into one complete finish. So all I'm just going to do now is spread it out with the wax paper. And the reason I'm using wax paper is because I don't want to dust the board and incorporate too much flour, which would actually make the crust very, very dry and it might not even be able to hold. So wax paper is a very good technique you can actually bring into this recipe if you're definitely not thinking of adding any more flour. And as I said, pastry is very much a precision kind of cooking technique, so everything has to be perfect. Remember, the moment I dust my board with a bit of flour, it will dry out the mixture and it will actually break when it goes into the oven. We're just going to spread that out a little bit. So also something else to pay attention to when you're making your crust, depending on the container or the baking dish that you decide to use, always try and get the symmetry of the base before you actually finish rolling out. So all I would do is, I'll just show you. So as you can see, I'm just going to show you an example. So if we were to assume this was completely rolled out, all I would have to do is get the dimensions from the size of the container just to know how much more I need to roll out, and then it would actually fit directly onto the tray. So as you can see, that's just about ready. So all we're going to do is we're gonna just even it out. We're just gonna roll it out a little more. I'm just going to give that a 90-degree turn, spread it out a little more. Right, and that's just about done. So I'm just going to get rid of that. And now all I'm going to do is transfer that onto my container here, and I'll show you a very simple technique of how to do so. So as you can see, the dough actually manages to hold really well. It's still malleable. You can still be able to move it. So it shouldn't be stiff and it shouldn't crack when you try and move it. But one thing to also pay attention to, you might have a bit of the sides or a bit of the edges that are still loose. Very easy technique of getting it back in the proper shape you need it. I would normally just use the wax paper and just try and tuck in the edges. This is just to make sure that we don't waste them and that they don't fall off. So we're going to just leave that on the side. So I'm just going to use my wax paper to try and reconstitute the edges there, just to make sure it doesn't tear off as soon as it goes into the baking tray. So simple as that, and all I'm going to do now is transfer this. So I'm just going to let it slide off the wax paper. And I'm just going to support it with my hand. So as you can see, it's very, very easy to work with, very, very stable. So once you get that off, you could just slide your container underneath and you could just lay that on top. And as I said, definitely a key thing to watch for when you're making your casing. If your dough starts to crack before you're actually done with setting it onto the baking tray, those are signs that you use too much flour. And if you can still be able to look at it as it is and you can leave it onto the container and it still holds onto it, this is definitely one of the key points that you need to watch for. So this is particularly now, as you can see, a very good dough. And it should be you should actually be able to just press it all the way to the bottom. Remember, I'm using my fingers to just fill in the corners that didn't manage to sink in all the way to the edges. So always tuck the edges first, and that would be the bottom going towards the top. Right, so simple as that. I'm just going to use my thumb to reinforce the bottom there. Be sure to also to look for holes and pockets that may contain some air, so always give it a bit of a press before you work all the way up. Remember, a little bit of air underneath your crust, once it goes into the oven, the air will expand, and what happens is you're going to have a cave. So what happens is before you actually finish it off, I always recommend work from the center and just squeeze it round as you go all the way around the bottom of the dish. And once you're done with the bottom, you're just going to start doing the same thing on the side. So all you're going to do is press it against the sides of the dish. And once you've done a complete 360 degrees about twice, you know you've got all the crust in there. So all you're going to do is use a small knife, and all you're going to do is take the excess off. So I always insist, please don't cut your pastry until you're very confident that the crust is in there, because remember, you cannot really re-roll this. Once you've rolled it once, you can't really take it back and roll it again. It might include you having to add more flour, and as I said, you put a bit more flour in there, you ruin your whole crust. Right, so I'm just going to finish by taking off the excesses. And also remember to keep just pressing as you continue. Be sure not to cut until you're certain. So we're gonna take all the edges off. So as you can see, it actually fits in there really well. What we're going to do is we're going to just, so actually for the remainder of the dough, like for the pieces that you still have, you can actually just squeeze those back into a bowl. You can actually keep that in the fridge and add it to a mixture that you might do later if you're following the same. Or you can freeze it and always thaw it when you're going to make your next pie, and actually save yourself the pressure of making too much. So all I'm going to do with this is I'm just going to press it against the board, just as I've done. And all I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to wrap it in its same sheet. So I'm just going to go around. And this beautiful parcel should be able to keep in your freezer really easy. So we're just going to leave that aside and come back here. So I'm just going to use my thumb now to just finish off the top. Remember one thing about the case, you don't really have a lot of options or a lot of chances to work on it. So you actually get the one chance to do it really well. Remember, once this goes into the oven, you can't really come back and touch it again. It's only a matter of filling it and then chilling your dessert in the fridge. So I'm just going to make some indentations with my thumb. This is just to make sure that the pastry holds onto the top side of the container, and once it starts cooking, it's not going to topple over and fall into the center. So simple as that. And then another thing to remember the pockets I mentioned earlier. There is one beautiful step that you can actually ensure that the pockets don't actually affect your pastry, and that would only entail just putting a couple of holes on the bottom and just a few on the side. So the reason for that is if there is any air underneath that wants to escape, it will manage to get to do so through the holes that you put through. You can alternatively use a knife, or you can use a fork. You can put as many holes in there. Remember, once this cooks, it is going to swell up, and the pockets, the small holes that you put in are going to close up. So this is now ready for baking. We're just going to throw this in the oven. And as I said, we had reheated our oven already. So I'm just going to reconfigure that, and I'm just going to set it for 200. And I'm going to set my timer for about 10 to 12 minutes. And we're just going to let that bake. We're just going to give it a bit of time to bake, and then when it comes out, we're just going to pour our mixture in. We're going to leave it in the fridge, and I'm going to pull out one that we did earlier in the show, earlier before the show, and you're going to be able to see what it looks like when it's complete. So while I take my time to complete cleaning this mess in front of me, I'm going to give you a chance to take a break, refreshen up, and when we come back, we're just going to go to the last finishing stages of this beautiful dish. See you in a short while. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We took a short commercial break, and before we did, we had just put our case in the oven, which I'm about now to take out. This is now cooked. So we're just going to take this out now. And it's just, as you can see, perfectly brown, just the way we wanted it. So this is now just ready to fill up, and we're just going to throw it straight into the oven. So I'm just going to give my mixture one more whisk just to make sure it's not splitting. And all I'm going to do is pour it right from the center and just let the mixture spread all the way to the top. Right, and always be sure to try to get the excess of the mixture off the sides of your bowl. Just use your whisk to really scoop out the rest. You don't really have to waste that much. Right, so easy as that. And now basically all that's left for this now is we're just going to allow the pastry to cool off a little bit, and then we're just going to set this in the fridge. Remember, as I mentioned, this is something you'll probably have to make a night before, and it should be ready the night that it should actually be set the day that you actually serve. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to let this cool off a little bit, and then I'm going to move it to the fridge. And when we come back from the next short break, I'm going to now show you what the complete one looks like. So we're going to take a short commercial break. I'm going to give this a few seconds to just cool off. I'm going to throw it in the fridge, and when we come back, I'm going to pull out one that we already did earlier, and you're going to be able to see what the complete dish looks like. So see you after the short break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Before we took a break, we were actually just setting one of our desserts that we just did. We were making a key lime pie, and we put it in the fridge now, and it's just chilling. But I had mentioned that I did have one particular one that I did in advance, which I wanted to share with you. So I'm just going to take it out. Right, so this one's now nice and set. This one's definitely now worth serving. So I would definitely just serve this as it is. But just to finish it off, I would probably just give it a bit of a garnish on the side there. And definitely I would just serve it as it is. More serving suggestions for that, you could always serve it with maybe a scoop of ice cream on the side. You could actually serve it with custard because it is actually a fridge set dessert. Remember, this actually goes onto the plate cold. So it's always now nice and easy to just serve it with an accompaniment cold as itself. So without altering the recipe particularly, there's a few more modifications that you can do to your key lime pie. As I always insist, do some research, check out a few websites, look at a few recipes online. There's definitely enough content out there for you to try out. So do get curious, do get creative, do try this at home. Write back to us, leave your comments on our Facebook page, leave your inquiries, leave any questions that you have, and we will be definitely looking forward and we will be glad to get back to you. So from the studios and myself, it has been a pleasure hosting the show for you, hosting the show today. And until the next episode, from the studios and myself, have a lovely day.